Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Retro Gamers Podcast, episode number 264. Larry here, and there is an Anthony here, but it's a different Anthony of sorts. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show, Mr. Anthony Chu.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. I appreciate being invited back to the show one more time because, holy smokes, I have not been a guest on here for a long time. It has to be at least easily over a year, right? Yeah, okay.
Maybe.
Okay, like the kids say nowadays, right? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's great to be back. I have not done a podcast in nearly 2 years. So it's great to be back on the airwaves, especially with my best friend right here. What more can a man want, right?
Absolutely. And of course, Anthony Chu talking about the podcast, which I owned and hosted, and he was just a member of being the Yin and the Yang podcast, which is an excellent podcast. You can check it out on the ownership, because I control it, on my YouTube page, More 365. You can find the old episodes. What's the matter?
Okay, I have a bit of a different version of that, but fine, that's not a problem. But that's not the point here. There is a major task at hand today because we have an amazing topic.
We do, actually. Before I get into that, though, I just want to talk about some stuff, just as far as, and I'm going to be posting some pictures here up shortly. I've, again, probably for like the, 13th or 14th time, redid my entertainment center because I just can't, I could never find a good combination of what systems to put out, how it should look, what systems do you have right now?
Do you want me to be very honest with you?
Yeah.
So everybody in the video game world will laugh when I say that there are only two things I have right now in my house. I have a Nintendo Classic Edition.
Nice.
Okay. And which is still, I don't even think they make them anymore, right?
No, they're pretty much, I don't think you can find them anywhere.
Okay. And are you ready for this one? An Xbox 360.
There you go. Nothing wrong with a 360.
I love my 360. I can't part with it, man. I really can't. I mean, I have everybody from, like, let's say if contractor comes in to repair the house or whatever, and even guests, will say to me, "You actually have a 360?" I'm like, "Yeah," So hey, there you go. I gotten into a lot of retro gaming as of late, actually, since teleworking most of the time. On the times I don't telework on company time, I've been but don't say anything to anybody, okay?
No, who's watching this thing?
I'm sure my secret is safe with just me, you, and thousands of other people.
Well, maybe not thousands, but still. Any games in particular? Because I actually saw you. I logged on to the Xbox recently, and I actually saw you were playing Mafia 2.
Yes, I love that game. Mafia 2, and actually I wanted to update my gaming system and get either an Xbox One. I wanted to play Mafia 3. I heard that was amazing.
Okay.
At the same time, I actually went onto Xbox Live and started downloading a lot of original, old school 80s games.
Okay.
Year of Kung Fu is one I love.
Year of Kung Fu, yes.
Year of Kung Fu, yeah. That's good. I like playing old stuff, like old 1942, 1943, I think.
Those are classics.
So 41, 42, 43. Yeah, so I, just download it, enjoy it, and just really, yeah, definitely.
Excellent. Again, nothing wrong with the 360. In fact, those systems are the final ones that I'm kind of putting back together on my entertainment center. So basically what I did was, and if I'm smart enough about this, which I probably won't be, I would somehow try and pop up a picture here of what my entertainment center looks like. But in essence, so I got the big 50-inch flat screen television. And I am not a fan of putting televisions, mounting them on the wall. It's just me. I don't know, just something about it I'm not crazy about. So I always had it on a regular stand, but you lose a lot of room because you can't get underneath the TV.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did was on Amazon, I had bought basically it's like a mounting bracket for the wall, but it's essentially on a stand.
Ah, okay.
And what I did was I probably got and so essentially I raised my television off the entertainment center, and I probably got a good foot or so. Yeah, probably a good 12 inches now of room underneath the television.
Ah,
And yeah, so because of that, I mean, I was able to now properly, because I'm also a little lazy, to get to some of these systems that were kind of like on the bottom shelf and having to swap out games and everything.
Yeah.
Not really my forte. So
right.
The closer I can get to them without bending over, the better, which I'm working on. But right now, so under my TV, I now have working my Genesis with an original Sega CD, my PS2, slim PS2, my PS1, again, the smaller remodeled PS1, and then my analog NES and Super NES. So those are now all on right underneath the television, and they don't block the TV, nothing like that. Like I have an NES cart right now in my Mini NT Noir, and it's not even coming anywhere near the television. So loving that. I also, in the meantime, then, because I have a little more room on my little side table, I broke out my Wii, which is essentially now my glorified GameCube, because that's what really I'm just going to use it for, because you get a little more crisper.
Do you remember back in the day when we did Wii bowling, Wii boxing? I mean,
Wii
Sports. Smokes. We really beat the daylights out of each other.
We did, and of course, I am the reigning Wii bowling champion. But with that being said, what?
Again, it's a very different version of a story that I okay. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So I got the Wii, which again, really just going to be my glorified GameCube. My Wii U, which will be my Wii and my Wii U. I have my little Retron 77 that plays Atari 2600 games. And some of those I'm going to be looking out for some new ones in a moment. And then my Atari VCS, which, yes, is a newer system. So basically what I have left is to just kind of figure out where to put like my PS3, my original Xbox, my Xbox 360, stuff like that. So finally, to a point where, because, for listeners of the podcast, I've always been struggling with trying to get this set up excellent. Anthony Rippo, the normal co-host of the show here, he has that cubbyhole system that he had with all the systems in each one, like an IKEA.
I can never understand that concept. Like, you see a lot of people on social media, they post up this massive entertainment center, and either on the signs or on the bottom of the television, there is this massive cased collection of every system in the world. And these people claim, now I don't know if they just take a picture just to say, oh, cool, look, I have this, or does each system actually work?
Yeah.
And if it does, I don't understand for the life of me how you can get 10 or 12 systems in an entertainment center and have them all work, no problem.
Well, I mean, times are a little different. If you remember originally, Ant, growing up, like what systems, like, did you have multiple systems growing up? And if you didn't, that's okay. Don't get me wrong. Not a lot of people did.
I had multiple systems, but I actually had them in different levels of the house.
Oh, okay.
So,
you had to spread out.
In Brooklyn, New York is very rare for most people. So in the basement, I had my Sega, my Genesis. In the main floor, I had my Nintendo, my regular NES, right? And then eventually on the second floor, in my bedroom, I actually had a TurboGrafx.
You had a TurboGrafx?
Yes. In fact, actually, I still think that the TurboGrafx may actually be in my parents' house right now. We were going through stuff. I found my N64. I found my Super Nintendo. Games, controller, 2 controllers for each, as well as like a as well as I think like 2 or 3 games for each system. And the TurboGrafx, I think, is still there.
How we've known each other for a long time. Some people may say too long. And, you know, I don't ever remember you mentioning a TurboGrafx. How did we go so long without me not realizing you had a TurboGrafx?
Maybe you don't know
your house way more often.
Maybe you don't know your friend all that well.
I thought we knew each other very well. Very good friends, compadres, almost brothers like.
That's questionable. Anyhow, so yeah, I mean, so I did have multiple systems within the house and that,
but they were all around the house. So with me, I had everything in my room. So if you remember back in the day, well, I guess not with your situation, but now we're talking back just during the RF switches.
Okay,
you know I mean, like an RF, and they were. I had them daisy chained because you were able to do that.
Right,
so
right.
I would have like 4 or 5 of them probably at my height at the most, just connected to each other. This long line of stuff. But then later on, we moved on to AV cables, you know, the yellow, the red, and the white cables. Then eventually that from composite went to component. And then now we're at HDMI. So when you see those cubbyhole setups, yes, it's very possible that a lot of the old systems are on with those old time splitters. Remember with the switches that you would hit? Big clunky conk. Now, as far as HDMI, because, you know, a lot of these systems are now HDMI, and a lot of TVs are now only brand new televisions are only HDMI. There's ways around it, but you know what? Like in Anthony's case, and of course I can't speak for him, but I'm pretty sure some of the ones he had set up weren't connected. They were just there for display purposes because he had systems to do. He has the Retro Freak, and now he has the Polymega. So those replace a lot of the systems, and I don't blame him for displaying them.
Well, no, I only say that because, like, for a lot of the people, let's say, especially the younger viewers, right? What I wanted to clarify was the fact that you're taking 80s, maybe even 70s, 80s, early 90s technology and, you know, wiring and everything like that, and you're comparing it or using it and adapting it to the modern day era. You know what I mean?
Trust me when I tell you, it's a pain in the butt. In fact, a lot of people right now,
it can be done. I understand. Yeah,
absolutely. So, you know, and a lot of people I think are going to be happy with what I'm about to say in this situation. You know, I've talked about before, you know, adapting a lot of the old systems to the newer TVs with HDMI. The company Hyperkin has put out HDMI wires for the Super Nintendo.
Oh, yeah. I heard about that.
Graphics.
Right.
I've gotten a few of them and they work beautifully. The one for the Wii, the ones for the PlayStation 1 and 2, I mean, just work marvelously. Then I'd gotten an HDMI wire for the Dreamcast, which works, but not for every game. And I actually have another complaint about the Dreamcast I'm going to talk about in a moment, which is upsetting me. But so an HDMI wire for the Dreamcast. Okay. Because my brand new television, well, not brand new, it's almost a year old, but my newer television has no composite, no component. I don't even think it has a coax cable in the back. So it's like HDMI only. And then the Sega Saturn I have, which again, I had an HDMI wire. So long story short, not all the games are compatible with the Dreamcast for an HDMI wire, which I still don't know how that works, but somehow it does.
Right.
And then the HDMI wire for the Saturn, it's weird. As I play the Saturn, if I'm like playing the Saturn for like a half hour, like the system starts to dim. The screen gets dark. And this was an issue with the HDMI wire. So that version I've had to scale back. So now the only 2 systems I have hooked up through old school AV cables, the yellow, the white, and the red wiring, is the Dreamcast and the Saturn, because I had to go buy an adapter that it's 3 in, 1 out. It's like a 3.5 inch millimeter plug that there is a little adapter in the back of the TV, which I didn't know about, but I had to buy an LG version. So that's
God.
it was such a pain. but now I have a little mini splitter, so I have those two hooked up and they're running beautifully. So I'm playing around with new and old as far as hooking these things up.
In summation, let me just put it to everybody this way, for all the listeners and for all the people who are watching us here. There is only one way and one phrase that you can sum up 80s wiring, like 70s, 80s going into 90s wiring. And and especially for the young folks who are listening to this, who may not have had to go through what you and I and a lot of the people who have lived through this time had to go through, there's one statement. The statement is this.
The snuggle is real.
No, struggle.
That looks like snuggle.
No, it's not snuggle. What?
Are you sure?
I wouldn't be caught dead drinking from a cup that says snuggle.
The struggle was real. And luckily, like, you know, the analog systems that I have for the Genesis, the NES, and the Super NES, those are brand new systems that play like the original systems, and they're purely HDMI and like USB power, which is beautiful. The Retron 77, same thing for Atari 2600. So I've updated my systems so they're not like, it's not an original Super Nintendo, but it is basically like an original Super Nintendo, but it's adapted. The other thing I moved on from is wireless controllers. This is going to be another thing that's going to make a lot of people happy. For like the Genesis, the Super Nintendo, and the Nintendo, I had invested in wireless controllers because, you know, it's just a lot of wires running around, right? So with these older systems, it was actually always recommended to use not Bluetooth, but like old school 2.4 gigahertz technology for that. But like they all stopped working for some reason. Like I've updated them, none of them were working properly.
That's odd.
So I said, screw that. And now I got like the Genesis is a hardwired controller. There's Nintendo and Super Nintendo are hardwired controllers. Mm-hmm. Third-party controllers that work perfectly, but they also have like a 10-foot cord. So, so that helps as well. And then, but yeah, besides that, like I said, hopefully I put a picture up here and there'll be some on social media. I got my Switch under the TV as well. That's just convenience. What was
the complaint you had about the Dreamcast?
So this I just discovered today. So now, first of all, I went to Game On this weekend, and I picked up Sonic Adventures for the Dreamcast. Phenomenal game, Sonic Adventures, like one of the best games of all time. And I come home. First of all, I didn't realize that I've already owned a copy of Sonic Adventures. So now I have two. And the one that I bought today was a little more pricier because it was more original than the other one that I have. So, but whatever. I also bought, which I thought was the issue, I also bought a third-party controller for the Dreamcast. Retron Fighter, it's called.
Okay.
So I plugged that in, and I put Sonic Adventure in, and it would just spin, but it wouldn't boot up. So like, that's weird. So I thought maybe it was just a bad copy. Hey, look, that happens. Sometimes you get a bad copy. That's when I went to go grab another game, that's when I realized I already have Sonic Adventures. So I'm like, oh, whatever. So I grabbed the other Sonic Adventures, put that into the Dreamcast. Apparently, I've never played it before for some reason, because then that wouldn't boot up. So now I got two Sonic Adventures that are not booting up. There's no scratches on them. There's no scuff marks. They're just not working. I thought it was because of third-party controller. I thought if the Dreamcast is figuring out that I was trying to use an HDMI wire from behind, that it's complaining about a third-party controller from the front. But no, I put in other games. I put in Ms. Pac-Man's Maze Madness and something that we're going to get into a little later, another game, and they booted up and they work with the third-party controller. I go online, and I've never heard of this happening, but apparently it has. There were some Sonic Adventures games that would just not work. There was a bad batch that went out into the public back in the day in 1999 and 2000 when the game came out here. And I've never known this. It might be. I don't know, but I can't play the game. Well, I got one of them. I got to somehow bring back. But I'm so mad because I wanted to play Sonic Adventures on the Dreamcast.
Sorry to hear that, man.
Oh yeah, it should be. So that's new. So if anyone out there is aware of this problem, is it like an issue with what version of the Dreamcast system I have or something like that? I think the one I have is a fairly early version. So
somebody please help my homie out. He needs the advice, or somebody advise him, somebody tell him what's going on here, because this is the first I've ever heard of it. I've never heard of a Sonic game having a problem, to be honest with you.
I've never had this issue. Actually, a friend of ours, little brother, messaged me when I put it up on the thing, and he was like, "Yeah, yeah." So I remember my brother trying to, when originally got Sonic, and the game just wouldn't load. So I don't remember that happening to me. Could have. I don't remember.
Okay.
I don't know. The Dreamcast has been a struggle ever since I rebought it like a year ago or something like that. So, but that's where I am right now with my systems. I mean, right now it's a little bit of a mess. I got to find a place to put my GameCube away, but otherwise, just kind of trucking along.
Let me ask you a quick miscellaneous question out of nowhere. So, by the way, for anybody who knows or doesn't know, I got called upon last minute. I just wanted to say.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. So I had to ask you this, and wanted to ask you this for a long time. It's just that we've just been so busy. When we get into talking about gaming and stuff like that, is there a system? And I'm going to ask this of the viewers too. Is there a system that you've always wanted that you've never been able to obtain, or if it was never made for home, that you would like to obtain? I'll tell you mine right now.
I know mine right off the bat, but go ahead with yours.
Neogeo.
Okay. That was pricey, though.
I love Neogeo. Just their games are awesome. The problem is, I mean, they had it obviously in the arcades. You go to in Brooklyn, New York, there were video stores. I know a lot of people are like, what? Like, what in the world is that? But yes, you could go into a video store, and they did have arcades there. Maybe a few machines or something like that. And Neogeo was always on tap for me anytime I went into a store. What's yours?
TurboGrafx. I've never owned a TurboGrafx.
You know, well, if I find it, Larry, would you like it?
I appreciate that, but I'm actually waiting for, again, Analog. That company is going to be putting out their version of a Turbo Duo, which is the TurboGrafx 16 and the TurboGrafx CD. And again, a situation where I'll hook up through HDMI and stuff like that.
You heard it right here, everybody. He's rejecting an original TurboGrafx 16. Just to let you know.
I'll take it. I'm not going to buy it from you, but I'll take it from you.
Oh, I'm sure you will.
I appreciate that, but trust me, if I was you, if you still have some games for it, I'd hook it up. TurboGrafx is amazing. It was such an underrated system, as we've talked about on the show. That having an original one, big time. But I would wait for I'm waiting for the Turbo Duo. Though I've already started collecting games, I might as well take yours or borrow yours in the meantime, because who knows when Analog is going to release their Duo.
You don't borrow a gaming system. There's no, listen, that's like the equivalent of Yoda. Either, do or don't. There is no try.
No, you never
just borrow something from somebody like that. Yeah, back in the day, you never heard anybody say, "Hey, how you doing? Hey, listen, can I borrow your Sega Genesis? Can I borrow your Dreamcast? When was the last time you lent me a gaming system?"
Blockbuster used to rent N64s.
Blockbuster was a multi-million-dollar company. You, my friend, own a podcasting empire. You couldn't just lend your friend here a system, but that's okay.
It's like, remember back in the day when VCRs first came out? I remember I kept borrowing my uncle's VCR, or like you would rent one from the video store if you didn't have a VCR. And I'm talking like early on. So I would like to borrow your TurboGrafx. I think that would be a nice thing to do.
For who?
For me.
You or me? Oh, of course. This is our friendship for over 25 years. I'm the fool and the fall guy. All right, for you.
I would not say that. I
come on. It's all right, Vince.
But nevertheless, me, TurboGrafx. I mean, Neogeo is awesome, but Neogeo is so expensive because you're literally bringing the arcade game home.
Right. Which is doable now. It's
funny enough, it's doable now, even though the games are still pricey. But now TurboGrafx games are ridiculously priced. So it's tough finding good TurboGrafx games for a reasonable price.
I think I still have there was a basketball game for TurboGrafx, and then there was a fighting game. It was like a Street Fighter type style game. I forgot what it's called.
It might have been Fighting Street, which is the very first Street Fighter.
Okay.
That was on TurboGrafx.
I believe that could be it. And then there was something else. I forgot what it was. Anyway.
Probably Bonk or something.
Could be Bonk.
And it's funny because TurboGrafx, that whole system is like pretty well known for a genre of games that I love, the shoot 'em ups. Vertical or side-scrolling shoot 'em ups like Gradius, R-Type, things like that. But I think what we're going to get into now at this point is another genre of gaming that I enjoy, that Anthony enjoyed, that we both have history of playing. And of course, with Anthony Rippo not here, we can freely talk about a lot of rage quitting that would happen back in the 90s and 2000s. We're talking about wrestling games. And that's what basically, and Anthony is already laughing because he knows exactly what I'm talking about. As far as Mr. Rippo is concerned.
Oh boy.
Anthony has mentioned it. He's admitted it on the podcast that he's done it. But we're coming up. We're 2 weeks out, at least as of the recording here, of the Royal Rumble. Yes.
I'm gonna zip my lip when it comes to him. I'm not gonna say a word. I don't want to destroy the man's image.
But you're taking the Morton Downey Jr. approach and zip it?
Yeah, I think that would be best because if I said what I wanted to say about rage quitting, let's just put it this way. He may love me like a brother, but doesn't mean that he has to like me after what I have to say. But anyway, yes, sir. Wrestling games. Holy smokes.
And yes, there's been a plethora of them. And Lord knows we're not going to go through them. But even though with the Royal Rumble coming up right now, their premium live event, as it's now called, no longer a pay-per-view.
Yeah.
I figured we talk about wrestling games, but not WWE games.
Okay.
Because there were, the list of WWE games is, if I'm looking at this list correctly, and we're talking for home systems, mobile, even I think a crossover at some point, there's been over 80 WWE games that have been released. And I'm just talking titles, not individual, like a SmackDown game being on every system. So there's a ton of those, but it's the other wrestling games that I don't think really gets usually too much love. And maybe we can talk about some of them today.
Yes. I will say to you that it's interesting. This is a genre that a lot of people, there are people out there, okay? And you can't say this about any other sport or sports entertainment or whatever you want to call this nowadays that it's evolved into. But I will say this, wrestling games, let's just put it that way, is something that I've heard a lot of people say they don't have to necessarily be a fan of wrestling or watch it on a consistent basis or know who the stars are and things like that. I mean, obviously it's turned global now, right? But back in the day, you didn't have to be a fan. I mean, you were most of the time, but I mean, even people like in school who weren't fans of wrestling, they liked to play those games because they were awesome. They were a lot of fun, All you need to know was the basic rules.
And it was a style of fighting game before fighting games were a thing. For Street Fighter, you were playing
the most contact sport you can get, actually.
Exactly, and I'm talking in the video game wise. And even though we're going to focus more on non-WWE games, your point of playing games but not necessarily being a fan, I think in the arcade, let's face facts, WrestleFest
was the best.
Was probably the best.
That was the greatest. And go ahead, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, like with WWE WrestleFest, there'd be lines. And I know for a fact that some of those kids in those lines waiting to play WrestleFest were not wrestling fans. So, right. Or not huge wrestling fans. Not like we were or are.
Like they knew all the content, but they weren't like diehards.
I mean, like everyone knew Hogan and everything like that, but still. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And actually, another reason why I want to mention this month with a lot of wrestling, not just the Royal Rumble, but 2022, a lot of the companies are starting to tour again. We're slowly coming out of the pandemic. So we got a lot of groups, and I know a lot of this might go over some people's heads, but some people are going to understand, right. Like Game Changer Wrestling debuting, making their debut. Not their debut, but for the first time ever, they're performing at the Hammerstein Ballroom in New York City. And the Hammerstein Ballroom is like the mecca for smaller wrestling federations. Like if you can't get to Madison Square Garden, you work the Hammerstein.
Like the next best thing. Yeah,
absolutely. So Game Changer Wrestling coming up, Ring of Honor getting ready to come back, Impact starting to blow up, and AEW, which is starting to hit the mainstream, where AEW is starting to top the WWE as far as fan favorite and stuff like that. So I feel like it's always been peaks and valleys. Wrestling has always been peaks and valleys. It's got high of highs, and trust me, there's been some lowest of lows as far as popularity. But I think we're in a resurgence and getting back to that high again. Which is why I want to give some love to these non-WWE games. Okay. I mean, let's just talk about the one we have to start with the ones that we played together, right. Going over Anthony's house. What's the first one, or what's the one that pops into your mind?
Okay. So besides the boys going out, meaning, Anthony, Rippo, me, Danny, okay. Yep. And there's you, with the crew. No, I'm kidding, man. But what I'm saying, like, as the crew went out, let's say, like, we had this arcade place called Fun Time. I don't know how many of you in Brooklyn, New York may remember that. There's places like that where we went, and it was all arcades for the most part, right?
Buddies.
And yeah. I mean, so WrestleFest obviously is going to be the thing, right, in arcade terms. But as far as at home, one of the very first games I recall playing over at Anthony's house was Techno World Wrestling.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, you knew, for the audience here, you've known Anthony a lot longer. You two have known each other a lot longer than I've known both of you. So.
Yeah, that's true.
No, I'm saying that's how you can go back that far, because Tecmo's going back a little bit.
Right. So basically, Techno was crazy because, okay, so if you played any 8-bit graphic games, you know that the characters are like this small, right? Yeah. Well, for the first time in a contact sport video game, you have these characters when they're doing their special moves, like the giant swing, right? I forgot which character Gomez does, right? He does a giant swing. They actually, or like you do what they call the fatal or fatanical brain kick or something like that, or the fanatical brain kick, where it's like a jumping side kick straight to your temple. You see these characters who are like this small now, they blow up and they're taking the entire size of your screen, and you're seeing the giant swing. And you're actually seeing how dangerous the move is, that it's like you'll get the win. So, and the storyline is good, is that you're in this league, right? And you're battling. And as you get to the very top, there's a very big surprise at the very end that you have to beat this boss in a way, right? So that was one of the earliest games I recall. I never really played pro wrestling. Remember that?
For the NES?
Never played. I always watched it. I never played it. Didn't do anything interesting for me.
I mean, pro wrestling for me was definitely the first game. What'd you do? What happened? For our YouTube viewers there. Pro Wrestling was definitely the first wrestling game that I owned. And a game that I'm so happy is actually available on the Switch, on the NES collection. And just Pro Wrestling is as classic as you're going to get. And to me, in the 80s, Tecmo World Wrestling was good. And Tecmo World Wrestling had a lot of, even though they weren't licensed, definitely a lot of homages to WCW characters.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And Japanese wrestlers. Now, Pro Wrestling was just pure separate, but Pro Wrestling was so solid in its gameplay, was so like the move sets were there were certain moves that were individual per wrestler. And the fact that this game is part of the original black box series of those original NES games.
Okay.
That, it always is going to have, that held close to the chest for a lot of video game fans.
Definitely.
And harken back to what you said earlier, Ant, I'm sure there are a ton of non-wrestling fans who loved playing pro wrestling. And here's the other thing too, because with WCW, with Tecmo, there was like 20 guys on the roster. This game only had This game only had 6, but the gameplay still felt very in depth. And is there anything that always, because whenever I think of pro wrestling, the video game, there's one aspect of that I believe, I'm sure I'll be wrong, I've never seen in any other wrestling game ever. And I don't know if you know what that might be.
No.
There was the cameraman on the outside of the ring.
Was there?
He was just a cameraman. He wasn't, you didn't interact with him, but he was filming. He basically was filming the show.
Huh.
And I always thought that was cool.
You never see that in most wrestling games nowadays, right?
Not at all.
Yeah. Wow.
At all. And even to the point where there was so pro wrestling, the game was so instilled into us that I have seen in wrestling, at least out here in the tri-state area, there was a guy who wrestled as Starman from the game.
Oh my God.
So I never saw him do the backflip though, the backflip drop kick, but he would come out as Starman. It was hysterical.
Oh my God.
So
wow.
But no, that's a good one. Cool. Do you remember early on when we started hanging out? Kind of what wrestling games comes to your mind with all of us together when the N64 came out and multiplayer became a thing?
I don't even have to think with this one. I'm going to give you 2. Okay.
Now remember, we're talking non-WWE.
Right. I'm going to give you 2. WCW versus the World.
Ooh, okay.
Now, why was that good? There's a reason for this, okay? The reason why WCW versus the World was good is because it was the very first pure. I could be wrong about this. It was the very first pure WCW game that didn't have the NWA in it or something like that. Was I wrong about that?
I mean,
I am wrong. No, I am wrong. There was one where it was, I think, for the Genesis, where it was Johnny B. Bad, my man, Johnny B. Bad, who I'm friends with, by the way.
You are actually, yes.
It had Ricky Steamboat.
I think you're thinking of Super Brawl for the Super Nintendo.
That's it. Okay, so it was a house for Nintendo. Holy smokes. That was an awesome game. That was really good.
Was very good.
Right. But why WCW versus the World was great was because, number one, it was multiplayer. Number two, it introduced the modern day era, crew or roster of wrestling in America. But they also had other wrestlers that were homaged or copycatted from Lucha Libre, which is in Mexico, Japanese pro wrestling, English pro wrestling. So, but they, obviously just changed the name and but you could see that they're like spot on copies, right?
Oh, totally. I mean, there was over 60 characters in this game, but only 13 of them were actually WCW guys.
I'm sorry about that.
Are you okay? Is your phone okay?
It's the phone has a mind of its own. I'm sorry. I think the cord is loose, so I don't know.
Fair enough. That's
sorry.
That's all right. So 13 licensed WCW wrestlers, and then the fictional wrestlers though were absolutely based on actual wrestlers, both from Japan. Well, mostly from even the Western guys were still like over in Japan as well. But yeah, you're right. And I remember because I never owned WCW versus the World on PlayStation. Anthony did. And I remember it was also the first game of that style, what we're going to talk about. And we're going to kind of mention other games with that wrestling look to it. But I thought it was pretty cool to see that mix of the super, the WCW wrestlers, especially before, I think it was right before NWO. No, it might have been shortly. I think NWO was in it, right?
Either they were in it or the next game was that when they were in it. Was it Revenge?
Well, definitely that one. Yeah, because that was WCW NWO Revenge.
Right. I don't remember. I really don't remember. Yeah, that's a good one.
That one I have to double check. But yes, and that's one of them. You said there was another one.
The other one I recall that we played pretty often, at least I know I played this with Anthony, was the ECW Revolution.
Yes. And I remember, that was big when ECW got video games.
I didn't like the game.
Oh, I'm not saying they were good, but licensing wise, though, it was cool to see.
Right. Oh, yeah. Those were amazing. Now, if you really want to sink deep too, prior to like one of the very first games I had personally at home, am I allowed to mention the Commodore?
Of course you can.
So the Commodore 64 had a game called Micro League Wrestling.
Right? That was a WWE game.
That's right. Yes. No, you're right. You're right.
Oh, look, I'm not saying you're not allowed to mention them, but
look, that was the first. But okay. In my house. I will also say to you that so if you're talking about within the time that we all got together and stuff like that, definitely WCW and NWO Revenge was a big one. That had the Royal Rumble mode.
Well, it had a Battle Royal mode that was like a Royal Rumble.
Battle Royal style or something like that. Right?
And of course, remember the Goldberg rule. Basically, as soon as Goldberg hit the ring, we eliminated. None of us were really Goldberg fans. So, yeah. Kind of like
man.
Nowadays. So
wow. Just wow.
But yeah, we would just, if we were beating each other up, if Goldberg was next, stop what you're doing, eliminate. If one of us,
he would cheat you to death.
He was Goldberg. That's what he did. That's what he did in real life.
Yeah. Right. So that was that was funny.
That was a good one. I remember, with I want to go back to the ECW games. Yeah, they were tough, but they were the two games that came out: ECW Hardcore Revolution, and then ECW Anarchy Rules. And I have Hardcore Revolution for the Dreamcast.
Right.
I might have had it originally for the N64. I think. But yeah, those two games to me were more special just because it almost legitimized ECW. Because now that they have a video game, now they're players. WCW has all these games, WWE has all these games, and back in the 90s, the top three in no particular order for 1 and 2 was WCW, WWE, but always number 3 was always ECW, which was fine. And then when they announced that first game, which also was kind of the first game that had this, that the blood and guts kind of sort of, because they had a barbed wire match.
Right.
And they had death matches in it.
Yeah. Now, interestingly enough, around that early to mid 90s, you also had, and then going into the 2000s, you also had a lot of games that came from Japan that had the New Japan Pro Wrestling roster. You had the All Japan roster, I think. There was one game, I forgot what it was called. Tell me if you know it, where you can literally set up your own event and you were the booker.
Well,
So
that was
placed. I don't.
That was on the computer. I think that was
No, it was not on the computer.
No, was it?
No, it was on.
Oh no, you're right. It was on a. Oh
right,
man.
But for the listeners out there and the people watching, it's interesting because you actually could play booker, meaning that you were the one who was the promoter, and you would set up, the matches that you wanted, you thought your audience could see. Now, if you book correctly, there would be this good morale, right? But then I think that if you book bad, it would be a message that says something like, after you booked it and the event's ready to go, it would say something like, there are many outsiders being brought in. The wrestlers in the back are asking questions. Something like that. Like, why did you bring these people in, or something like that? So like you had to, and it was interesting because it was the first time I've ever seen like Japanese, like hard hitting, like, they're strong.
What's called strong style. Yeah.
Right. Where they really make us like hard contact. And they had that in the game. It was tough to play though. It was really tough to play. Larry?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No. If you're going to ask a question, go ahead, because I was going to move on to another game.
I was going to mention something else too.
Go for it.
Do you remember there was a game that was, I forgot, was it for the PS2 or the PS1, where it was Legends of Wrestling?
I was going to talk about that in a little bit because, so Legends of Wrestling came out.
I mean, talk about what you wanted to talk about originally, but I just wanted to put that up.
Well, no, let's talk about Legends of Wrestling now because we're talking about it.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah, Legends of Wrestling. It was basically everyone who wasn't working for WWE at the time, because WWE was really the only one around. Anyone not signed to a contract with them was signed to this independent game by Acclaim. And what I remember about Legends of Wrestling is I remember in college, the Acclaim showed up, because Acclaim, I think, was out on the island somewhere, Long Island, out here, or in one of their offices. But Acclaim showed up twice, from what I remember, to my college to do surveys for upcoming games. One of them was for a game called Burnout, which is an amazing car series of games.
Yep.
And the other was Legends of Wrestling. Because I remember when I went into the university center, I was going to get some lunch or whatever. I'm like, oh, what is this? And, it was a clipboard. And it just said, if you were of these wrestlers, who would you like to see in a video game? And I'm looking at them. And as I'm looking at the list, I'm like, what is it about these? I'm like, oh, none of these are WWE guys at the time. A lot of ex-WCW, a lot of ex-ECW guys, WCW, stuff like that. So I did the survey, and it ended up becoming Legends of Wrestling, which I thought was really cool. Another fun fact, after doing the surveys, you got like a free video game. I remember I got like T2 for Game Boy for
what?
Yeah, and I forgot what the other one was. I got like a PlayStation game, I think, for the other one.
Nice.
But in any event, I just remember doing the survey for and ended up becoming Legends of Wrestling, which I always thought was cool. A game that I would like to get my hands on is a game, and it's in Japan, so I got to check out old Super Potato. It's called Virtual Pro Wrestling 64.
Oh, I've heard of that.
This one? Okay, so it's basically, it plays like, or it's considered the Japanese counterpart to WCW versus NWO World Tour. And this game has one, two, well, one, two, three, four, five, six separate companies represented in the same game. On top of that, has a bunch of legends at the time. And the roster, I mean, first of all, and I hate to say this, but it's a Japanese game because there was no way they were getting the pure rights to this. Apparently, Muhammad Ali was in this game. Tyson was in this game. Leon Spinks was in this game.
God rest.
Michael Spinks.
Yeah.
Giant Baba's in there. Terry Funk, Ricky Dozan. And then you go to WCW guys. You go to the point where you get Eddie Guerrero, but he also is Black Tiger too in this game.
Oh, interesting.
You get NWO is in it, but then you have New Japan. You have All Japan. This is all in the same game. Some smaller like UWF International, Fighting Network, Rings, and Pancrase. Excuse me.
Pancrase, yeah.
I say Pancrase for Pancrase. FMW is in here.
Oh.
And so is Michinoku Pro.
Okay.
Now, again, I know we're going over the heads of some of you, and I apologize, but there are others of you who know who these companies are and what they represent. And yeah, this is a game, and even has on the cover, it kind of advertises NWO and WCW wrestlers.
Mm.
Now, a lot of these games that we're mentioning, WCW, NWO World Tour, Revenge, this game here, Virtual Pro Wrestling 64, and even to go a little bit further, because, which we're purposely not mentioning for the topic, but WWE Wrestlemania 2000, No Mercy, probably the best one of all. All of these have something in common, and that is a developer, Aki Corporation, AKI.
Yep.
Like Jax took over, and they were good, but these Aki Corporation games they were out of this universe.
I think what it is that what made them so creative was that I think that they were really, the developers were fans.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think that they really understood the market and they understood what the customer or what the gamer wanted. The problem with a lot of the games after them, and Jax did a good job.
They did.
The problem with them is that they were so commercialized that after a while, I personally felt like, okay, blah, here you go. We're just going to give you what we think you want, but we're really not going to know what you really, we don't care about what you really want,
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of find that like they fell off after a little bit, but Aki did its job and they should definitely be commended for like what they've done because they were just, man, you can't replace those games.
Here's how good Aki is. Do you remember the Def Jam series of games?
Yeah, I do. I remember that.
Wrestling games with rappers in them.
Yep.
And we're talking Def Jam Vendetta, which was put out by Aki. It was developed by Aki, put out by EA. Had DMX, Method Man, Redman, Ludacris, Scarface, Ghostface Killer. I don't even know who half these people are. DJ Funkmaster Flex. I know who that is. Artists of Def Jam. And this was a wrestling game, folks. And then, of course, the sequel, Def Jam Fight for New York. Again, considered a wrestling game.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just, Aki was just, they were tremendous in what they did. And they were able to put a positive spin on these wrestling games. And I know we're getting ready to wrap up here in a little bit, but, notable mentions, of course, the Fire Pro Wrestling Series.
Yes.
Known for absolutely bootlegging wrestlers. And do you remember the Backyard Wrestling games?
I played one of those and I thought it was stupid. I really thought it was pretty dumb.
Now,
it was one that had New Jack in it, right?
Yes, I think that was a sequel. Backyard Wrestling 2.
That was nuts.
There goes the neighborhood. And again, just to allow for the younger listeners to wrap your head around this, during the 90s, really during the late 90s, there was this surge of backyard wrestling. Basically just kids getting together and like doing their own wrestling shows, not trained, you know, not even having rings. I mean, really, you had to be a jerk to do backyard wrestling, in my opinion. So
yeah, but then again, okay, but I'm not trying to say I disagree with you for the most part, but yes, there was a massive surge. It was like almost like a trendy phase that a lot of young kids got together and started doing dumb stuff.
but
right?
I'm not mentioning that just to talk about that, but that's what led to the games.
But then there's also certain like companies, right? One in particular, like USW, those guys were, I mean, they were considered backyard, but there was actually wrestling involved.
They were all right.
No, they were good. They were very
popular. Good. They were popular.
But they also did some regional stuff.
But
anyway,
like,
yes, but that's where the backyard concept comes from.
And that's why even I wasn't really crazy about the backyard wrestling games, because again, with this and I remember like the news, I think 2020 did some news things about this backyard wrestling, because these kids and they were kids, you know, teenagers, but they were not like your regular wrestling, like, because back in the late 90s, that's when like hardcore stuff started happening. So they're throwing each other onto thumbtacks, into barbed wire. I don't know where you found barbed wire. You know, they were doing all these dangerous shots, and then to kind of glorify that by putting out 2 video games that were basically backyard wrestling games, I always felt weird about, even though I owned one, but I don't think I bought it. I think someone got it to me as a present, as a gift. But I was never really crazy about those 2 backyard games.
I agree with you. I'm not a fan of that type of thing.
But
it's been my cup of tea.
Any event, like I said, there are tons of non-licensed WWE games to talk about. But since we're 2 weeks away from the actual 2022 Royal Rumble, let me ask you, is there one game, it could be WWE or WCW or a different game, that you feel probably had the best version of the Royal Rumble mode, or Battle Royal mode if it wasn't WWE?
Okay, so in terms of arcade, come on, you know, hands down, I'm going to say WrestleFest, right?
That had a Royal Rumble mode, yep.
Yeah, and that was the best. Now, for me personally, if you exclude WWE games,
no, you can. I want your best one out of all of them.
Okay. Out of all of them, Raw, WWF Raw. Remember how
Super Nintendo and Genesis?
Yes. How insane! You, me, we played that game for so long. I think we played it for what, 2 years?
We played it for a little while.
2 years, 4 years. I mean, that's like master's degree time. You know?
Well, Raw for Super Nintendo is how basically me and Anthony Rippo met, and then from there, you know, you joined the. Well, I technically joined you guys because you guys already knew each other. But that's
thank you for the clarification. I appreciate that. All right, yeah.
But no, Raw. So Raw will have a special spot in my heart for that.
Always.
But did you say any other ones, or it was Raw was definitely the one for you?
Definitely that. Definitely Revenge. For sure.
Revenge was good. WCW Revenge.
That was always good, especially with the Goldberg rule.
Goldberg rule in effect 24/7.
And now WCW versus the World had a Royal Rumble Battle Royal type mode too, right?
Yeah, they all did essentially. And I mean, even if they weren't trying to do a Royal Rumble, it's the only way to get the cast of characters into the game, because you can only get 4, and then at some point they pushed it to 6 characters on screen at once. So you had to, even in a battle royal, you had to get someone out before someone new would come in.
There was also a women's wrestling game for the 360.
Rumble Roses.
Is that what it's called?
I think it's called Rumble Roses.
They had one too. Did they not?
I mean, what a game called. I feel like all of the games have some version of a Royal Rumble or a Battle Royal at that point.
Right. That was kind of fun. I'm not going to lie.
No, it was Rumble Roses, then Rumble Roses XX, which shockingly enough, I never owned either one of them.
Rumble Roses, actually, I have right now.
I should get that. That's pure. I don't think they're based on anything.
Women's wrestling, basically.
Yeah.
Is what it was.
Well, some of them might be based on people.
You know what would have been hilarious and I was just thinking about this earlier. You're gonna laugh at me for this.
Probably.
Now, I don't know how many of you lived through the 80s, but there was a campy women's wrestling organization called Glow.
Yes.
The Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling, who that company folded in 1990 for whatever reason, and it was at the height of it was like the peak of their popularity. Now, I think had it gone into the 90s, it would have created a game. I would have liked to have seen them create a game. Now, that would have been awesome.
That would have been
with several of the characters and stuff like that. That would be pretty cool. That
would have been interesting.
I've always wondered. Now, a lot of the modern day stuff is obviously very, very different. But I think that still, if it was one game that I could play consistently every day, or at least every other day, it was definitely Raw. Definitely.
Okay, for Super Nintendo.
Yeah, I love that game. I still have the Super Nintendo. I just wonder if I still have that game or not. I don't know. Yep.
For me, actually, funny enough, I think my favorite is WWE Royal Rumble. Not on Dreamcast. I'm not talking about the one in 2000, the one from the early 90s on the Super Nintendo and Genesis. I had the Super Nintendo version. Though I do want to get like the Genesis version of Raw and the Genesis version of Royal Rumble. And you have Super WrestleMania because of the different rosters, but that's for another story another time.
I remember the
rosters.
Yeah. I remember the Royal Rumble game for Super Nintendo.
That game rocked. That game was phenomenal. And then as far as like the N64 era, I would say my favorite was probably No Mercy. Besides the actual characters that were in the game, I just felt the flow of the game. Like No Mercy was just so on point with everything that even the Royal Rumble mode was spectacular. So,
definitely.
So, all right, excellent.
What a trip down memory lane, man.
That's what we do here. Listen,
it made me feel young for a while.
Oh, I feel so old right now. It's ridiculous. So, but that's what we do here. We just talk about the nostalgia. We're not breaking new trends here. But with that, we're going to wrap it up here. And thank you very much for being on the show.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
And I busted your chops earlier, but honestly, you definitely the host of the widely popular Yin and the Yang podcast, and hopefully one day we'll get Anthony Chu back on the airwaves.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Every time I come onto this show, it's always a heck of a lot of fun, especially going down memory lane. Sometimes, yes, it's true. Your life always, life is only lived if you move forward, right? But let's not forget that there's a balance where you also have to remember, where you came from, what you were doing at the time, and it brings back good thoughts. So that's why, definitely continued success with this podcast. I'm glad that you guys have gained like a great following. I remember when you really initially started these episodes, and I was just like, okay, cool, right? And then it just really blew up huge, which is great. So keep doing what you're doing, Larry.
I appreciate that. We appreciate that. And you got anything? I don't know. You got anything to plug? Anything to push? Anything you want to mention?
I was actually talking to somebody about putting together a reunion show for Yin and Yang podcast.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Okay. Yeah, I'm in the works. I'm in some negotiations right now. I'm not 100% sure about what's happening with that, but we'll keep you guys updated, or if I get any news, I'll let you know, pass it forward.
Well, I thought I owned the rights to that show. So no one's talked to me yet about it.
Oh, well, I think the show is almost done. Do you have anything else to plug too, Larry? Because, I really don't. I don't. What I will plug.
Oh, what?
What I will plug is that once we finish the episode here, I'm going to go play some more Mafia 2.
Do it. Absolutely. Mafia.
And then I feel like it's a punch-out night tonight.
Ooh.
It's definitely a punch-out night tonight.
Have you ever completed the game?
Mr. Sandman and I have a date later.
Awesome. Have you ever beat Tyson? I mean, Tyson and Sandman are the same person, basically.
But get to Tyson, I can't beat him. Can't beat him.
Sorry, neither have I. I never even came close to him. So
What you were saying, sir? Go ahead.
yes, let me. This is the part that Anthony usually does. So let's see if I can get it right. You can listen to us pretty much everywhere. You listen to podcasts. You can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, on where are we? Anchor FM. We're on Spotify. Basically, we're at Amazon Music. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find us. You can watch us as you are right now, probably watching us on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram at the Retro Gamers Podcast, on Twitter at Retro Gamers Podcast, on Facebook at Retro Gamers Podcast. You can email us, email at theretrogamers.com. And please definitely hit us up. We do get comments. We see your comments. We try and respond as much as possible. But definitely, let us know what wrestling games, what non-WWE wrestling games were some of your favorites. And folks, with that, I'm going to say once again, Ant, thank you very much for joining the show.
Thank you.
And folks, we will catch you everywhere next week on the Retro Gamers Podcast.